Here's an Airbnb horror story showing that it's not cracked up to what it's supposed to be. It's not always a clear-cut case of easy money and easy cash flow as this example explores. My name is Paul with STR Horror Stories, and let's take a look at the story that I found on Twitter. So in this particular case, a young pregnant lady who lives in a duplex in San Francisco decided to rent her upstairs unit as an Airbnb. She had guests staying there for a couple of weeks, and the guests left abruptly. What she did not realize is the toilet had backed up, and as a result, that's caused flooding in the upper level that impacted her unit on the lower level. Since it was a plugged toilet, a sewage-related issue, it caused damage to the entire house. So far, nobody from Airbnb has really offered to compensate her for the full amount that she's lost on this house. They've only offered a small portion, which really doesn't begin to cover all the damages that she suffered. This article from the San Francisco Standard states, instead of resting with her feet up, the expectant mother is in the middle of a 6-month ordeal that has forced her to move out of her home, send hundreds of emails, and swim in a sea of multicolored spreadsheet as she attempts to repair her home, which was destroyed after her upstairs Airbnb guests clogged her toilet and completely flooded the property. So her home was entirely gutted. States here, floorboards were torn up, drywall dismantled, and personal belongings stacked up in disarray. When you have flooding in a house, especially if it's left untreated for a while, there is a lot of water damage, and that water damage can be expensive to repair. It does involve tearing down studs in certain cases, tearing down drywall, removing carpet, taking out old wood, hardwood, if the water is soaked through. Especially in this case, it was sewage related because of the toilet backup. So a lot of the stuff is not even salvageable. With human waste, it's better off just throwing it in the trash. So Airbnb only offered 10% of the total costs that it would cost for her to restore her home into livable condition. Currently, she's not able to live in her home, so she's living elsewhere. Here's the actual post from Coach Erica sharing her Airbnb horror story. Overall, it's looking like it's going to cost at least $300,000 to fully repair the house into livable condition. As you can see from this video on Twitter, the water is dripping directly from the ceiling. Coach Erica goes on to say, I woke up Friday, April 14th to the sound of dripping water. First I thought it was raining, but looking out my bedroom window, the sky was bright blue. I jumped out of the bed, ran into the hallway. Waterfalls of water were pouring from the ceiling and light fixtures. As context, she owns a 2-unit building in San Francisco, 2 flats, one stacked up on top of each other. She used her life savings to purchase the building. She lives in the smaller lower unit with her husband, and she rents out the upper unit. So her long-term tenants that were living upstairs moved out. She decided to go the Airbnb route in hopes to make a profit. Initially, it went fine, but then in April 2023, they had Airbnb guests for a 1-month stay. They checked out early, no warning. They had clogged the bathroom toilet with baby wipes and human waste. They also damaged the valve that manages water flow from the tank to the bowl. A perfect storm. So water kept running from the tank to the bowl, over the bowl, and into the flat nonstop for 15 hours. She went to bed at a normal hour dealing with ungodly pregnancy nausea and with no idea that the unit upstairs was flooding. Then she woke up to a nightmare, a literal shitstorm in her own house, flooding all 3 levels of the building. And she points out, remember, it's fecal water. 50% of the building was ruined in 15 hours. Water can do quite a bit of damage to homes. So she called Airbnb for support, and what did they do? They told her to get the repairs done first, then file a claim against the guest for the full amount. Only if the guest refused to pay, then Airbnb could step in with their host damage protection. She again mentions it was a multi-$100,000 multi-month home destruction and rebuild project. It doesn't look like the guest could afford to pay it. So what about that $3 million host air cover guarantee? As you can see from the pictures, there's quite a bit of water damage. She notes, the gravity of the situation hit hard. I was homeless 1 week after I hit the 12-week pregnancy milestone and started to share the good news. She had to turn away another guest who was coming to stay in their unit because obviously the unit wasn't livable. She spent dozens of hours trying to get on the phone with Airbnb. They don't seem to care and don't seem to understand that she's not going to be able to submit a receipt for rebuilding 50% of her entire home in the 14-day claim period. Obviously that takes a lot of work. Contractors need to come through. They need to look at everything. Not only do they need to look at everything, they need to look behind walls, underneath floors, to get a good idea of what really is bad and what really needs to be replaced. The guests ultimately stated they can't pay that. She's already $130,000 in debt with these repairs. She notes she exchanged 93 emails with Airbnb and a third-party adjuster to investigate the claim. Airbnb refused to discuss the case until their third-party investigation was complete. She notes it took nearly 5 weeks for the third party to hire a plumber to investigate the toilet. He confirmed it was a clog due to baby wipes and feces and a bad valve. The plumber refused to leave her house until he was paid $375, which Airbnb ultimately sent that plumber out to investigate. So Airbnb emailed her expressing some doubt about the origin of the baby wipes and feces. They mentioned concerns about maintenance issues, basically putting it back on her as being the reason that this flooding had happened. Here in July, she's noting she's out almost $53,000, although she notes $20,000 in bookings that had to be canceled. I don't know necessarily you could count that, because until they've stayed there and paid that money, that's not necessarily the case. Definitely the money for the insurance deductible, the plumber, increased insurance premiums, water damage, demolition, and mold testing, those definitely are out-of-pocket expenses. Of course, she can't live in her house as well because of the damage, because of the water issues, so that's another expense, paying to live somewhere else. So she did internally escalate the matter, notes that her unreimbursed expenses have climbed to $300,000. She still has no timeline for moving back in her house and not a dollar from Airbnb. So she mentions Airbnb offered her a final offer of $31,000, basically 10% of the total of her out-of-pocket expenses. Doesn't really begin to cover what she needs to get repaired in that home. She notes it's been over 6 months since Airbnb guests destroyed the home. She's still homeless, waiting for her baby who's due any minute now, and just living in temporary housing under financial stress. To top that off, Airbnb took away her superhost status. Talk about adding insult to injury. So while it is an extreme example, it's an example of what can go wrong and what does go wrong. So there are a lot of rental units out there, whether they be short-term or long-term. You get just that one wrong tenant and everything can go south. Now with a long-term rental, you find a good tenant, you place them, they're good for a while. Chances of that happening frequently are little. But with your short-term tenants, you're basically rotating through tenants sometimes every couple of days, sometimes every month or two. With that, you're increasing the risk that you're going to get somebody who just doesn't care about your unit, just doesn't care, thinking, hey, I'm here, I paid for this, I'm going to do whatever I want. They do something like this where they clog the toilet, they jam it up, causes flooding in the house. There's other situations where they have drug parties, they have raves, they damage the house, there's shootings involved. So overall, depending on where your investment property is, how you're bringing in people, who you're allowing in your property, you have very limited control when it comes to a short-term rental. Basically, Airbnb is the one doing the screening. You can do some secondary screening to a limited extent, but it's hard to tell who's going to be that final guest who puts an end to your short-term rentals because they destroy everything. Let me know what your thoughts are about this situation in the comments below. What would you have done? That's all I have for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.